Ahoy there, mateys! Welcome aboard the Riff Raff podcast. We are the pirates of the spicy waters. Come along with us and hoist the sail. We're navigating life through story and tale. We'll help you embrace the way you're wired, sharing laughs and lessons to get you inspired. If you join us, we will help you see there are a lot of ways to sail the neurospicy sea.
Not gonna lie, I'm shocked by that. Oh, Lordy.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Romper bumper stop review. Just for context, one out of the group is on serious pain meds, and throughout the podcast, it's going to be like, "Where's Waldo?" And you can figure out which one of us it is. Tip, it's me.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. So just for context, welcome to Across the Desk. This is our Riff Raff podcast and our Riff Raff crew that is coming on today. Our topic is grief. Not sure how that's going to go. Paul did make a sad face earlier, but for those of you listening, not watching, Paul also has a full-blown Santa beard. And it's kind of hard to see the sad face, which is good. I mean, it just means people always assume you're jolly.
But then they're wrong.
In a bad Santa kind of way.
It's a facade.
It's all a mirage. Not wrong. I do have to share, and I don't know if I can. So, context again. I was in the ER yesterday from 2:00 in the morning until 1:00 in the afternoon, taking advantage of our fantastic Ontario healthcare system. And nothing. So yes, something serious, but nothing that's going to kill me. And in the context of that, the day before, when it's a back issue, my back hurt. I ordered something. Can you see it? Can you see it? You can't see it.
Can't see it.
I ordered a pink office chair inspired by Senora Sydney and Senora Maddie, not with us today. Because Sydney, your chair is pink, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I just thought I would say I joined the leagues of cool people.
Mine's lime green.
It goes. I mean, it fits the color scheme. Okay. The person who's on the most drugs should probably not be the one that's leading this team today, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So a couple of the things that we were chatting about during our giggle time was Paul has accepted the challenge that nobody made but everybody loves of wearing a Mucho Fantastic shirt for every podcast, and it's different every time. I feel like you're setting the bar high.
Is it different every time?
Or do I not pay attention?
I feel like
we started trying that, but I'm not that much of a clothes whore, so
I know there's at least
forgot an ass there.
Repeats.
But yeah, there's a couple of repeats, but this one is new.
Okay, so I'm not totally wrong.
No,
this one's fancy.
It's like with an E, with 2 E's to make it long. Okay, so what our topic is today. Actually, no, I'm skipping. It's going to be a lot of skipping today, folks. I'm telling you. They're pretty pills. So, Sydney, do you want to come on in and introduce yourself? I'm skipping around a bit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Elaine Butler. I am actively feeling grief, but I think we all are. And I'm also a founder of a business called Accessible Creates, and really just trying to make the world a little bit more inclusive and more accessible than I found it.
I really like that tagline, by the way. Like
That's really cool. It's
t-shirt
inspiring.
material. Yeah. They're also driving Paul nuts with their blinds. So apparently we're gonna have a
That's just a bonus.
blind. It's just
It's all gravy.
Paul grieving the loss of the ability to go in and physically fix Sydney blinds every time we meet. Mr. Coleman?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul. Yeah, I don't know what to say. After that great tagline, I don't really have one. But I mean, I can tell you why I'm here. As soon as I turn my alarm off on my phone. Sorry.
I was about to say, I hear bells, and with the
Yeah.
drugs I'm on right now, I'm like, what's happening?
It's the angels singing while I speak.
Oh.
No.
Yeah,
So
that was good.
why am I here? Because I found out late in life that I'm neurodivergent and specifically ADHD. And the more I find out about it, the more I realize. I see you laughing. ADHD diagnosed. There are suspicions.
About some
that
other
it goes
letters.
further. Yes. And no, to everybody's, to my surprise, but not to anybody else's, ADHD has been a big struggle in all my life. And as I am now older and found out about it, a whole lot of my life makes sense. And I just want to make sure that nobody has to struggle the way I did. And because it really affects self-esteem, it affects so many things. It's not about getting a diagnosis to have letters after your name, because that's how I feel some people look at it, right? They look at it and say, they treat it like a degree almost, right?
Like a charm bracelet.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody who struggles with it does that. I think that it's almost trendy right now for people to say it. Just like a few years ago, it was everybody was complaining about their OCD when they have no idea what that is,
Yeah.
So
Or what it's like.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just want to make sure that people have a safe place to be educated about it, and I don't know, maybe can laugh about it a little too, because that's kind of how I deal with things, even grief.
Yeah.
Oh, I swear, I make the most inappropriate joke. Okay, so hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm chronically inappropriate. Currently highly medicated for a bad back issue. One thing that Paul and I share is that we didn't discover why our brains were doing what they were doing until our kids got diagnosed. And people smarter than us said, hey, by the way, this might be an apple tree situation. And even then, I was so consumed by my son's diagnoses. He's autistic, ADHD, and dyslexic with executive function challenges. It just made function into a swear word. Sorry. So good drugs. So when we discovered the extent of his challenges, of course, you can't help as a parent but start reflecting and going, well, doesn't it, like every time a specialist would point out something about my kid, I'm like, but I just think that's super cool.
You're like, I do that.
So you know what, Sydney? Good point. I didn't. A lot of the stuff that my son does, I don't do, but I didn't see any problem with it. I was like, what's the issue? Like, I didn't, like, he used to memorize movies from beginning to end, actions, the soundtrack, and I just thought that was a really awesome memory. I remember sitting in the office with the specialist and telling her this and just waiting for her to say, oh, that's really cool too. She did not. She had some strong feelings about that particular trait. And in that moment, every time to circle it back to, because there's different ways to grieve, right? There's different things to grieve. There's different opportunities for that to come up. And every time I took my son in, and they found something else that was to them a problem, to me an opportunity, I think I grieved a bit. I think only in the way that I allowed them to shorten my son's or narrow my son's future. And that I had a real struggle with that. The day he was diagnosed,
I think
I had a real,
it's interesting because I feel like with some diagnoses or being diagnosed later, like there's so much. I think there's a lot of grief involved in that. Like when you get people, like you were saying about the doctors didn't think it was cool, but you thought it was cool. They said and so, but some parents just take the doctor's word as is, right? And so then they start grieving their children, whether like they can't do this, they can't do this, they can't do this, instead of reframing it and being like, okay, what are the opportunities here to, and like I think it seems like you did with your son, right? And I know like Paul with their children and Maddie with theirs, and it just, I think grief goes a lot with like reframing of seeing how you're framing things. And like right now I'm like whether that's a person, whether that's yourself, whether that's, there's so many different things to grieve.
like it didn't last long. I regretted the time that it took me off track for my son. I
Mm-hmm.
regretted the time. I don't use that word lightly, by the way. I don't use the word regret very often because to me it's a very big word, and it always involves something that you can't change. Regret traditionally happens to something, it's something that it's a word you apply to something that's already happened, and you can't do anything about the fact that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Regret never changed anything that happened. What regret always does, I'm shoulding a little bit, what regret could always do is influence what you do in the future or how you do things differently going forward or whatever. So I do regret a little bit of the time I allowed that grief and those people's perspectives to shape how I thought about my son. And then I think I pretty quickly moved into F it and just went, no, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't accept this. This is where ADHD is super fun because if you happen to be of the people, and Paul and I share this, that somebody tells you you have to do something a certain way, you're like, do I? I
I
feel
feel
like
like
that's
I
a
do that.
suggestion.
I think 'cause, like
You do too?
I'm autistic and ADHD, so I think it like it's all in the tone and how someone says it. Like if
100%.
someone just says it like casually, or like I'm like, okay, but then if like, and I think it's also like this same like, and if it's like stacks up, if the person keeps saying in a certain tone, and if it's like okay, they said that one tone, maybe they had a bad day or something, and then it's like okay, listen the other time, and also like trusted individuals, but other people are just like
That's a huge word.
right,
Tell me more.
and so yeah, it's just like, oh, there's people that are already. I don't want to say like people proving themselves because like to like me like
It's
because
true.
and it's just like it's like, oh, you seem like you don't know what you're talking about, like um or like you're just imposing you're assuming I don't know what I'm doing, and you're just like you're making me seem incompetent, and so just to like follow you with no questions, but just like then that's when I'm going to question you, right? But if it's like I
100%.
trust you, I trust that you have my best intentions, your best intention, everyone's best intentions. It's very intention focused, I feel like, for me, and tone focused when it comes to that.
Totally agree. Anybody, it was interesting. Um, my dad died when I was 20, which I've mentioned before. And that I
Speaking of
started
grief,
losing. Well, no, it does tie
yeah.
together. It does because I started losing people in my family when I was 7. So I've never really
Mm,
known a life without grieving somebody. Um, because my grandfather died when I was 7, and then on my mom's side, then my grandmother died on my dad's side when I was 10. Then I'm sure there was somebody in between 10 and 20. Um, and then at 20, my dad died. 2 years later, my grandfather died. A year after that, my grandmother died. In the middle of that, my dog died. And I just haven't known a life without loss, which is
yeah.
true for most people. When I meet somebody and they're my age and they still have like, so I'm 56, just for context. So it's rare, but even in my 30s, sure. Who's the oldest on the podcast, Paul?
Me?
Yeah. Try again. If I meet somebody Sydney's age who has, right, all of their grandparents and both of their parents, I'm like, what's that like? I have no idea what it's like to have an
Well,
intact family.
I never knew my mom's mom, and I never knew my dad's dad, like ever, right? Because my
I'm not
mom's mom
suggesting you
died.
have that. It's more
No,
your
I'm just like
age
saying,
range,
like
sorry. Yeah.
I know, but I'm just like I bring that because it's like it is an age, like it is a thing. Like it's more common to have that from people my age. But then I bring that because like since I was born, I never knew them those respective grandparents. I had other grandparents, and um, but it's just an interesting how like like my mom's mom died when she was 7, and I could feel the impact of my mom's grief for losing her mom so young, and how she raised us as children, right? And then I never met her, but we would go to the cemetery, and like, so I still actively grieve that relationship I never got with that grandmother. And that's why I
Right.
go by her name is Elaine, and that's why I go by my phone name, Cindy Elaine Butler, to honor her, even though I never met her.
Aw. Right. You just gave me a moment. So on my hospital bracelet yesterday, they did my full name,
Hmm.
which is Elizabeth Ann Isabella. Yes, it's a mouthful. But I'm named for 2 grandmothers and an aunt. And I never realized why I talk about my full name so much. And it's because it invokes my ancestors.
Hmm.
I'm going to have a moment.
Because
No
people
boobs. No,
like
no boobs
my
today,
name is
just
Cindy.
tears.
My name is Cindy Butler, right? But then I'm like, I tell people I want to go by Cindy Elaine Butler, and sometimes they just cut. There was one time there was a program, and they're, oh, we couldn't fit the Elaine in, so we just took it out. I'm just like, I told you my name is Cindy Elaine Butler. Please respect that, right? And so I was, and I got they reprinted the programs,
Nice.
and
For you.
the event started in like 30 minutes. I was,
That's amazing. Well
yeah.
done, you. Paul, speaking of names and ancestors and all that kind of good stuff, have you found that with either yourself or your kids that you have sort of honored ancestors with naming?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was George William. I'm Paul William. Gideon is Gideon William. And the same thing
Nice.
goes on my wife's side. There's naming that's
That's my dad's side. The first name of the father is the second name of the son. So my grandfather was John Fennick. My father was David John. My brother is Christopher David. And um, my parents had divorced, and my mom had an absolute hissy fit at the idea of my son having my dad's name in any way. But to honor that tradition, my son is Thomas Michael, because my husband is Michael. Sydney, I'm telling you, you're like, I'm having all the big feels with that whole name thing. I never put together why I do that. And it's because I miss them. I miss them intensely. I
never met my grandma Elaine, and then she's the only one I call grandma. Like I mostly call my grandmother's Nana. Like Nana Olivia that passed away last year, that died last year. Funny thing about passed away. I remember when my granddad died that she got me married when she was 53, I believe, to my granddad that I knew for all intents and purposes.
She was old. No,
Never too
56.
late to marry to start over. She taught me that. But so now I'm blanking what I was gonna say.
Passed
Oh yeah,
away.
yes, passed away. So when he died, we were at a Boston Pizza one day, and she's like, "I hate the term passed away. Like if people can use it, but she's like, they died." And when we've been like in the thick of losing her last year, I was like, "Oh yeah, my nana died," and I could see people getting uncomfortable with the word death and dead and died, and I'm like, she didn't like the term passed away, so like you can use it for your
I
people,
totally
whatever,
agree.
that's fine. But I'm like, that's not what she liked. She's like, I'm dead. I died, like the dead. So I
It's like
think
when people say
that's
they lost somebody. I'm like, did you
yeah.
misplace them? Like, what did you?
You lost them in the park,
I don't.
but I think that goes into like everyone expresses grief and how they express it differently. So it's like it's if that's what makes you comfortable, that's what makes that's okay. But there is realities.
Wonder sometimes. So like, and all of us have experienced and just we didn't have this part of the conversation beforehand, but everybody can share as much or as little, and that's always our rule on this podcast. Is that we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I asked a question, and Paul needed to pass, and I respected so much that he did that because we don't ever want to be in a situation where we're forcibly disclosing things we don't want to. And I think that's something about grief that I find very uncomfortable is that people have expectations around how long it should take and what it should look like. And that's where I was going before I got distracted before was that when my dad died, everybody was tut-tutting and patting me on the head, and it was just really weird and very uncomfortable. And I think it was more about how they needed to express their grief versus what I needed to hear. And my friend Tammy's mom, bless her, Susan Joyce, thank you, just looked at me one day and she said, "You know what? It just sucks."
Mm.
And I felt so seen in that moment of, yep, that's exactly how it felt. It was anybody, like, I appreciate you and I know what you're trying to do, but when you say things like, "Oh, they've gone on to a better place," or whatever, I think that's very contextual. If somebody's deeply of faith, then that makes sense. But if you don't know somebody's faith situation, it's a big assumption about their spiritual beliefs and about what they believe around, the system of death and what everybody's process is. I wouldn't suggest everybody go around going, "That sucks," because not everybody's gonna, not everybody's gonna be okay with that. I don't know. For me, and Sydney, you made a really important point. Part of it is about trust and the relationship you have with somebody. My friend just lost her dad. There's a reason this is an important distinction. He was technically her stepdad. She lost her biological father, I think 5 years ago. Uh, and so I'm in the middle of that because Bob was my second dad for 40 years. And after the initial I'm sorry and whatever, I just sent her a message going, you know what? This just sucks.
Mhm.
It just sucks. So I wonder about the language of grief, right? So Paul, like what kind of language would you use in the, what would you want to hear maybe or express?
Um, that's a tough one for me because it depends. Even if you're a person of faith, it depends where you are in your walk in that faith,
Ooh,
right?
Mm.
Sometimes when you're in the midst of grief, somebody repeating back to you something from your faith, it can be very comforting.
mhm.
But we all know that, we've all been taught the stages of grief, and if you're in the anger stage,
Oh, yeah.
some things you just don't want to hear because you're upset. But I don't think it's ever wrong to say to somebody, I love you, and I'm really sorry that you're going through this.
Mm.
It's yeah, because
Kind of agnostic, right? In a good way.
Yeah.
yeah, because if you are a person of faith and you believe in a heaven and a hell, if you go to somebody who's of the same faith and you say, oh, they're in a better place, what do you say to somebody who wasn't of your faith? Right?
Mm.
So there's a time and a place for all that kind of stuff, and I think that when somebody's grieving, if you know they're of your faith, it's okay to share some scripture or share some words, but just be cognizant of when people are going through that, they're feeling this sense of loss. So to affirm that's okay. To say, I'm sorry that what I hate is when people use your grief to express their own. Like,
I've been guilty of that.
I know what you're going through, right? You
Mhm.
don't know what I'm going through. You
No, I
may
don't
have
say that.
experienced a loss as well, but you don't know what I'm going through, right? So, and these are all things I've learned from making mistakes myself in saying things to people, and then being on the receiving side of it. And each loss was different for me. So it kind of hit me differently, and so that's why, like what you would have said to me when my dad died, would have been taken a lot differently than if you'd said the same thing when my mom died,
Mhm.
because I was in a
How far
different
apart was
place. I
that?
was 10 years, 10 or 12, maybe 10. I think 10.
We're not
I
going to
don't know.
fact check, but
Yeah, no, it's 10 to 12 years between them.
but that's a decade, right? And we all undergo. My parents managed to die 28 years apart, exactly 2 weeks apart. And it was super weird. And my brother and I are sitting in my living room, and he had flown in from BC, and he missed her by like 2 hours.
Mhm.
Um, and then I looked at him and I said, how did our parents, who were divorced, my dad was remarried, the whole what, managed to die 28 years apart, exactly 2 weeks apart. And this is how our family does grief. My brother just looked at me and said, well, we'll get it all over with in 1 month. Not wrong. It's pretty clean logic. Um, so for those of you that haven't, necessarily explored grief or knew, I was just doing some quick searching because I forgot about that, Paul, the 5 stages. And so the ones that have been accepted as the normative stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And what I love what it says underneath, thank you, Google AI, is that it's a nonlinear process. You might skip a stage or repeat one multiple times. The original context. So the model was first made for people facing a terminal illness, not just general loss. And I have lost one parent and other family members very suddenly, like no warning, no nothing. And then I have lost others in a longer process. I got to tell you, completely different. I've had people say, oh, it's the same thing. Which one have you gone through? Where is your opinion being formed? Because if you have only experienced sudden, that's your experience and that's totally cool. If you've only experienced long, that's also your only experience. So slow your roll because grief's different for everybody on top of that, but those processes are very different. And there's no right way. Grieving has no set timeline or correct path to follow.
But why not?
Wouldn't that be nice? There was just a
Only.
checklist. I
I
had
like
a
my
friend
checklist.
say to me, right? We're going to talk about that in a second, Sydney.
I mean, death can be so different. The experience of losing a loved one can be so different for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody is in a long-term illness and suffering, and it's just been a burden for that family for years, then there's a sense of relief when they die. And
Which is awful.
people have a really hard time grasping that, right? That why am I relieved that I've lost this person? And you haven't, right? And I think that's why the stages of grief are you take it with a grain of salt, right? Because not everybody's going to go through the same thing. We all have different emotional makeup as well. So, and I saw that in my kids when my mom died. You know, they all handled it a little differently. So yeah, but yeah, you know, like my wife lost her brother a few years ago, and it was sudden. He was only 54, and he had a major heart attack, and nobody really kind of expected it, and it happened while my mom was in hospice. So my wife never really had an opportunity to grieve, right? Because she was putting it aside to be there for me, right? And to be there for my mom, because my wife turned out to be her main caregiver even though she was in hospice. My wife never left her side and did
That does
everything
not
for her.
surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I know Paul's wife, and she's a warrior.
Yeah. So, you know, so they say death can bring people closer together, and that was definitely the case in watching my wife care for my mom. It just, I didn't think I could love her more than after that, you know, before that. And then to see that, it was huge. But then death can rip families apart too. You see a family that loses a child, everybody goes, how long do you give it? You know? Yeah, it's oh yeah, if a family loses a young child, it's about it's better than a 50-50 chance that they'll either band together, or within a few years that family will fall apart. And
I have a friend who's experiencing that, and they're in coming up to 3 years of having lost their eldest son. And I've been fortunate to be a witness, support, but what I mean by a witness is watching them navigate this process, watching them turn it into an opportunity to help others, watching them become advocates for what ended their son's life. And that I just, there's a saying that your friends are a reflection of, you gather people in your friendship circle who reflect your brain.
Yes.
When I see the strength, and I've been there for the opposite end of that, right? Like we've been supporting for the entire time, but when I watch what they do in the name of their son, it's awe-inspiring. Like I've, I can relate to grief. Paul, I think you made an extremely important point around that phrase, I know what you're feeling. I took that out of my lexicon years ago because never could I ever assume any kind of expertise in what somebody else is going through. So what I try to do, and this is a trait I discovered, so I'm curious about, because everybody's, positive on the ADHD situation. One of the ways folks who are ADHD try to relate to others is sharing personal stories. And it's a known thing. And it's not to take over somebody else's story, but it's to demonstrate somehow that I don't know what you're going through, but I can relate to what you're going through. And you don't have to pretend with me. You don't have to hold anything back, because I've sat in a similar chair of screaming at the walls and lying on the floor and screaming. And so when you said, Paul, about taking over, like somebody else using grief to process their own, I've been guilty of that. And no, I don't know. I think what I was trying to do was share stories so that a person would know they weren't sitting alone, that somebody in the room could relate and be there and not judge. And I think that's what I was trying to do. I don't know, because of the way my brain works sometimes, that was as successful as it could have been.
A lot of times, at least I interpret, sorry, Sydney, I interpret it often when people say stuff like that as, like, my brain just goes to stop making it about you. Like, no, I'm not saying you do that. I'm saying if somebody comes to me and says, oh, I remember when my mom died and we went through this or whatever, like, my brain just immediately goes to stop making it about you.
What's a way to reframe that, right? Because that's assuming a certain intention. And then you get, not you, but anybody who's having that reaction might keep going. Sorry.
No, I mean, it depends where I'm at. Like, if I'm in a place where I'm not going through grief at the moment, right? And I hear somebody talking about that, it doesn't, or if I talk about, if I'm not going through grief and I'm talking about the loss of my mom or my dad or whatever, and it's just in conversation, it strikes me a lot different when people also share, because you're just having, you're just in a conversation. It's just different when you're emotional and you're going through it and you just need somebody to say, I'm here for you. It sucks. It sucks. Just to affirm that. But I hope we're going to talk about different kinds of grief as well, because grief isn't just for loss of death, because we talked about diagnoses, right? And how there's a grief associated with that,
We're going to circle back. I asked Google, because Google's smarter than me. So what I asked Google was, do neurodivergent individuals experience or navigate grief differently? Like, how does being neurodivergent impact the grieving process, which is already so what? Tell me more.
Yeah.
Ah,
I have a story on this one. When my dad died, so my son had a stroke in utero, or right after he was born. We really don't know, but right around the time he was born, he had a brain bleed actually, and so he has cerebral palsy. And we were told all of his issues were related to his cerebral palsy. So his the way he speaks, the delay, the processing, a lot of his issues were related to the brain injury. And it wasn't until he was quite a bit older that he got the diagnosis of autism on top of all that, which caused, grief on our end as well, because we already were dealing with one thing and then we didn't know anything about it. And but everything started to really make sense. But so if you meet him, you're like, oh, he's autistic. But you have to realize, like, how did they not see that? Well, because we were told by doctors it was all related to the brain injury. But his most of his challenges in life are related to his autism. So anyway, just that to say that when my dad died, we hadn't gotten the diagnosis of autism for Gideon yet, or hadn't really kind of sunk in yet. I can't remember the timing exactly. But he was so distraught that he didn't cry when my dad died. And he didn't cry at the funeral, and he didn't cry. Like he could express that he was sad, but he never cried. And he went through a stage where he was telling everybody that he had no emotions, that he was broken, kind of like that he was stoic. Like he probably tried to make it a positive thing. He was stoic, but he was trying to learn how to deal with what he was feeling, even though his body didn't cry. He just processed it differently. So it was interesting just to see that. And I don't know if that's typical of somebody with autism, or somebody who is autistic, sorry, or not.
my
But
face was about that. I was processing what you were saying.
for him, watching him go through that, he almost struggled more with the fact that he wasn't grieving like us than the loss of my dad, than the loss of his grandfather. And they were
Because of
very
that
close.
normative expectation.
They were very, very close. So yeah, it was just interesting. So I don't know if that's an answer, but hopefully that story resonates, because everybody grieves differently. Doesn't make it less than.
It's Sydney, did you want to jump in on that?
Can you repeat the question? I was just like, I'm just doing trans by Paul's story. What was the question again?
Well, here's what I'll do. I will share what the Googles say about neurodivergence and grieving. And then to Paul's point, yes, we're going to circle back about different things that because we have touched on in previous podcasts how when each of us have either discovered or been diagnosed that we're neurodivergent, then, and I think it was Paul who said this on a previous podcast, we grieve for how hard our life had to be because we didn't know. And I look at, I think I've been lucky that I haven't lost a lot of experiences or opportunities because of being neurodivergent, but navigating them, I think it's the amount of trouble that I got in that I grieve. Like I look at my business and I know the impact ADHD has on it. That I get, I really wish where I am now in my business, I could have been there 10 years earlier.
Hmm.
And I wonder if, being ADHD has precipitated that. Because I'm of an age where I got more life behind me than I do ahead of me. And I worry that I've wasted opportunity. That's a whole nother thing. Okay, so
That's part of grief, yeah. We'll talk about that after we talk about the neurodivergent.
So neurodivergent individuals often experience and process grief differently than neurotypical social norms expect, to support Paul's point right off the bat. Grief may manifest as sensory overload from memorial rituals, delayed emotional processing, or intense focus on logical details rather than outward crying. Recognizing these neurological differences helps validate varied response to loss. And so the next little points here are how neurodivergence shapes, I'm going to say can shape grief because I really don't like absolutes. Sensory and physical impact. So funerals, crowded viewings, or changes in home environments can trigger intense sensory overload. Pardon me. Grief often shows up physically as deep exhaustion, body aches, or nervous system dysregulation. I see Sydney
Yes.
nodding out of the corner of my eye. Okay. Processing differences. Conditions like alexithymia can make it hard to identify or name emotions. Sadness may surface later or manifest as meltdowns, shutdowns, or behavioral changes rather than traditional mourning. And as Sydney and Paul have both said, this can apply to the grieving process in a variety of ways, not just death and loss of people. Logical or hyper-focused coping. Some brains cope by obsessively researching details of the loss.
Hee hee.
Or, spoiler alert, or asking repetitive factual questions to process the abstract reality of death. Oh, that's
Perfect
the first
score.
time that's the first time how I grieve has ever actually been put into words. That's super weird. I have the best time on these podcasts because I always learn shit that makes me post
That's
diagnosis
why I am the way I am.
like a Popeye. I should get a can of spinach for my next adult tattoo. My adult sticker, sorry. So post diagnosis with grief, identity shifts. Oh,
Sorry, I
here.
missed the mute button.
That should be a t-shirt too. We got to write that down. Sorry, I missed the mute button for other people. So post-diagnosis grief, identity shifts. Receiving a late autism or ADHD diagnosis often triggers profound grief for the life you could have had with earlier support. Ding ding. Revisiting the past, adults frequently experience a painful reappraisal of childhood memories, unmasking past struggles and processing old shame. Should have read this from the beginning. Support strategies.
Is the
How are
printer
you
going?
printing?
Somebody sent something to my printer. Hang on.
So support strategies that the Google's talks about is drop behavioral expectations, which is like that's like saying grow taller. That's allow
We're
for
gonna get
non-traditional.
Paul's height.
I would like you at 5'3" to reach 6'2" in the next 6 months, please.
Is that a challenge?
So drop accepted. Allow for non-traditional expressions of grief, such as stimming, retreating into special interests, or social withdrawal. Provide concrete help. Offer practical, specific assistance with meals, paperwork, or organizing chores, rather than open-ended offers of "let me know if you need anything." I personally find that one extremely overwhelming. Somebody says to me, "anything you need." I try very hard now when I offer support to somebody else to say specifically, if you'd like to go for a walk, or if I could get groceries for you, or whatever, their
I can cook a
choice.
meal. I cook a meal together. I've cooked meals together with friends that lost other people. Helped them meal prep. Then there was a friend recently, and then helped them meal prep for the person that died because I didn't know the wife, but they knew that they were all close, and I was close with the people that I reached out to, and we meal prepped for the wife that just lost her husband.
I'm going to do this last one, and then I have a story about that. Anchor the nervous system. So if you happen to be neurodivergent and you're experiencing grief for an event, not specific to, use simple sensory comforts like weighted blankets, predictable routines, or quiet solitary time. Or having said that, Maddie, I love one of Maddie's suggestions that they offer up, which is not necessarily solitary, but if comfort for you is sitting in the same room with folks, but you're doing your own thing, right? So you have the comfort of people around you. There's no,
Oh, the
or
parallel play.
yeah, the parallel existing that if for you being completely alone isn't great, the idea of having to navigate being social, regardless of trust being there, regardless of knowing the person, maybe an advocating thing could be, look, I want to be with you. I don't want to talk. You don't need to fill the silence. Can we just read a book together? I saw a thing online where somebody started a group for basically adult parallel play, where there's no expectation to be social. You can bring your knitting, a book. Like the only rule is no electronics. For me, I found it great when people just sat there. And one of the best things that somebody ever did, I was working with the Autism Job Club at the time, and the whole leadership team got together and members of the group, and they brought over bags and bags of frozen meal options. And it was just like I had to take a moment because it just took a whole load off, because I cook predominantly from scratch, and I didn't have capacity to think about feeding myself beyond cereal. And in the short term, that's okay. If you need to eat cereal for 2 weeks because cooking is too much in your middle of your process, friends, it's not cooking. Unless you're managing diabetes or a health condition that could be negatively impacted by eating cereal 24/7. Eat the sugar snaps. Plus they're really good. So we see all of those. I think all of those support strategies could be applied to multiple things. So to Paul's point, Paul, what kind of things would you see that would be a non-traditional grief? What else could we grieve?
Did Sydney ever get a chance to answer the question about, or was there a question there about how grieving is different?
It was a question-esque.
Right.
Question on Jason.
I don't want to leave that if you had something you wanted to share on that.
I think the only thing I was gonna say is the really the physical symptoms of grief, and I really live with chronic pain, and so it's it kind of just exacerbates and intensifies the already existing chronic pain, and even and then I learned that chronic pain, with my grandma, I mentioned that I never met, my grandma Elaine that I never met. She had chronic pain that was passed down to my mother, and then I also live with now, and it's just still that grieving of who could I be without this pain, right?
Wow.
And or I think also in families, grieving. It's you mentioned things about your family, Elizabeth, and other things, but just there's different pain that people experience. There's pain in families and grieving. It's grieving. Some people don't want to feel it. They just pass it on to the next, or just don't really want to sit with it and feel it. And so I feel like I'm the one in my family that's actually both sides of my family actively feeling it and trying to, I know I'm going to live with it, but how do I still make a life for myself and still show up the way I want to show up, even dealing with all those things and dealing with that magnitude.
Good processing. It's interesting because I was thinking about that when I was at the hospital yesterday. I started thinking about folks who
Hmm.
deal with what I was dealing with just about every day. And I don't know a life with chronic pain, right? And what I value about those experiences is the opportunity it gives me to hopefully gain some insight. But I wondered about that. I wondered what's the process for creating the life for how you want. I love that you said that. How do I still show up and be the person I want to be and make the change? Because I love how I think every time you introduce yourself, it's about how you help others, which is huge, despite navigating some serious kokaka that can
Hmm.
muck up different days. So are there days where that gets to be a bit much? Or do you feel like you've got a good support structure going on now that
I think for the most part, I have a good support structure, but every day is still different. And like some days, it's like if I'm like out and about, or it's like, oh, I pushed myself too hard yesterday. I'm gonna feel the consequences tomorrow. Or oh, now I'm feeling the consequence. I wake up in the morning. Oh, I'm feeling the consequences for pushing myself too hard yesterday. And I think I think I've talked about this before in the podcast, but really giving myself that grace to be acknowledged that of how that is part of how I'm. It's in the bigger picture of how I'm showing up for my life, because every day is different, and and I think even with grief, like some days, like in the traditional sense of losing of someone dying that was close to you, you still have, like you said, is you don't want to get out of bed. That's sometimes how you process it. Or some days, like I found out at the beginning of this year, I found out I lost my mentee that I had in a program I was facilitating a couple years ago. And some days it makes me not want to get out of bed, and other days it's just like I'm like, okay, how can I actively find ways of honoring her legacy, and how can I show up and really keep her memory alive and active in these spaces, because she was also an accessibility, activist in her work, right? And so just finding it's not linear, and I think that's why it's so messy and complicated. And when it comes to grieving anything, like you were talking about the grief stages, Elizabeth, like it's not linear. And I think I think we want things in sequential order. We want linear, but we know it's not. And so that's what makes it challenging.
I wonder, I think for all of our brains, we could, and I'll go to Paul. Is it the big fly. Is it the non-linearness of the grieving process, whether it be navigating a diagnosis, whether it be a loss of mobility, whether it be, is that non-linearness that can make it challenging to figure out and figure out what our support could look like. My brain is a weird brain that craves certainty in a process and simultaneously goes, nah,
Just need a
hey,
bit of sanity and a bit of chaos.
yes, It's like a sugar spice situation. I want a little bit of hot sauce with a lot of sugar.
I'm the reverse.
Something like
A lot of hot sauce, a little bit of sugar.
Let's see who the weak link is on this. We won't be on hot ones anytime soon. So Paul, like, and I'm glad you circled back to that. So what kinds of things have you encountered that would be a non-traditional grieving situation?
Job loss. I grieved. I lost a job before I started my business. I lost like 3 jobs in just over a year. I was working at a company that I had put all my hopes and dreams in, and it closed. It didn't make it through the housing downturn of when the economy went
Like 2008?
in 2008. And then I got a dream job right after that, and that company ended up getting sold. We did such a good job with that software. It got sold, and they didn't want the team. They only wanted the technology. So I was out of that again. And then I ended up in a stint in insurance, which was awful. But it was
Not my cup of tea.
yeah, it was like loss, and then loss again in the course of a year, year and a half, let's say. And that really affected my mental health. Like, I went through a really bad depression after that. And I don't think people understand how much a job loss can affect somebody. And it's not, it's not the only one. There's divorce, there's all kinds of things that, loss of relationships, whatever. But yeah, that one was a really hard one for me. But I mean, I have some mental health issues. I struggle with depression a lot. And so when it affects my purpose, my feeling of accomplishment, you know what I mean? I feel like that type of loss where it's like I've lost control. I've lost, almost feeling like I've lost my value. That's a really, really hard one for me. And I don't know if that anybody would consider. I guess that would be considered grief in a way. I hate to do this, but I have a hard stop in about 4 minutes. So
We're almost at the end anyway, so that's okay. No, I think divorce is definitely one. Changes in relationships are huge. You grieve what thought was going to happen. It could be a friendship. I've had a business partnership go south. Yeah. Sydney, what would you add on to those top? It looks like we're going to be doing grief 3.0, folks. But what, like, non-death
I was
grieving
gonna mention friendship. I think going with relationships also, and sometimes what I grieve in, like, I've experienced a handful of abuse in previous relationships. I'm not going to go into details, but it's a reality I've experienced, and I'm now in I've my healthiest. I'm currently in my healthiest relationship of my life, and this is the person I want to marry. And sometimes because of the other abuse I've experienced and being neurodivergent, I sometimes grieve the way I show up in my relationship. Like, I grieve how they're literally treating me well, and even sometimes when they treat me well, I grieve what I realized what I had in other relationships that weren't the greatest, and I'm just like, and then it's just like grieving what I never got, and then I grieve that I get like healthy relationships trigger you, folks. Like it's because you're like, wait, what? And then you realize what you didn't have before, and so I grieve that sometimes I have emotional outbursts and have meltdowns from being neurodivergent, and then I feel bad, and I feel like I say grief because it's grieving. It's like, again, what if I wasn't like this, right? And grieving, um, and so it's really there's so many different ways to grieve, and I think that, like Paul was mentioning about his son when lost. You said his granddad, Paul. Yeah, and so I just like, and I think even going with it, like grieving, like friendships or grieving, like even with that, like people might like, oh, you're sad that you lost this friend, right? But then I lost a friend that I consider one of my best friends, and it was
I'm sorry.
upsetting. We didn't cry, didn't, but also it felt like relief because it was also getting toxic at the end, right? And so emotions are messy. Grief is one of those emotions, and there's no right way of experiencing it, and just understanding that there's so and grief is, I think grief is like, there's so much lack of understanding of what grief actually is and what it is to experiencing it, and it's so vast that like you said, Elizabeth, we can do grief 3.0 because it just there's so much to talk about, and really it's you're gonna grieve as long as you're alive, all these different things. That's one of the constants in life. And so that's why it's so hard to contain into one single box.
It's also not something that so outside of this podcast, we are all friends and we all work together and we all, there's differences in our relationships. Grief is not something, one of the reasons I think we need Grief 3.0 is that this is not something that is a common topic in social situations. You don't walk up to somebody and go, hey, how are you? I like hamburgers. How do you grieve? Like,
Mm-hmm. And who
it's,
are you grieving today?
Have
you know,
have either of you ever gone to a grief counselor?
yes. Sorry.
Oh, you didn't find it. I went for like half of it and I
Was
stopped.
I lost a
But
girl
I
guide
had
leader, and so they brought a grief counselor in for us when I was in Rangers to explain, like, help us collectively grieve, and like, and she's like, if you need one-on-one support, I never went for the one-on-ones. I know some people did, but that was my only experience with a grief counselor.
one of the biggest takeaways. So I went through like half the program, but one of the biggest takeaways I got from that was, we all know somebody who's a bit much, right? We have somebody in our life that every time you talk to them, they're like, no, not, no. Like, you go to talk to somebody and they're just like always talking about this loss or always talking about being like, they need somebody to talk to, right?
Yeah.
But it becomes toxic for you and as the listener. And so when I went to this grief counseling, they were talking about how it's important to like categorize your friends and know, like, don't trauma dump or don't do this on everybody, because then it'll push everybody away from you at a time when you need that. So having, like, that's why it's really important sometimes for people to go to get counseling or to have that one safe person who will be there for you and not judge and not everything else. Because if you turn around and start trauma dumping on everybody, you'll find yourself alone. And I realized that because my mental health wasn't the greatest when I was going through this, and I'm like, I recognize that in myself. You know what? That's true. Anybody who'd give me a minute of their time, I would trauma dump on them. And I didn't. It's okay to need that, but if you find yourself doing that, it's really, really advantageous to find a grief counselor or find a therapist or something that you can talk to, because it's scary that you can push people away and it's actually counterproductive to what you're trying to heal from.
You're also asking people that don't have the skills and training to handle what could be, it's pretty heavy emotions in a situation, right? And when it's complicated, I mean, grief is always complicated to the individual. When there's circumstances around the grief, your friendship group are not trained to handle intense grief moments that are made more complex by mental health or whatever else. And my friends, thank goodness, finally said, like, because I need to talk it out.
Mhm.
Paul and Sydney both know that. I find big emotions and things like that, if I process it up in my head too long, it's not good. But like it said at the beginning, where the fact finding, when I'm talking it out, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to fact find. And until I finally say something a certain way, or I hear something a certain way, it's like picking a scab. I keep going back and ripping it off because I haven't found what I needed to process it. I did try a psychologist when my dad died, and that, I don't remember why that broke down, but likely in the moment, to go back to what we said at the beginning, it was the way he was telling me to do stuff, or the way he was suggesting things. I felt like I was being parented and told what to do, which did not go down well. And then when I tried Bereaved Families of Ontario, weirdly for me, I don't think I was enough out of the grieving process to get benefit out of the group.
Yep. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. You can't be so raw that you're not able to get through the group. The groups are, at least Grief Share, and there's a few of them out there. They're more designed and more helpful if you're past that real raw point. But on that point, I'm sorry, I have to go. I have to be
You have to go.
somewhere that's in 10 minutes, that's 15 minutes away. So
Okay. So Sydney and I will wrap up. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you,
And
Paul.
bye, everybody.
Brief 2.0 coming at you. So we will wrap up because we are at an hour and 12 minutes, which is a lot. But that trauma dumping impact, maybe we do need a 3.0, because I think that is part of, I wonder if I don't know what it's like to grieve neurotypically. I think that's the other challenge.
You're just like, what's that like?
Well, seriously, what is that
Yeah.
like?
Mhm.
Are other people able to just let certain things go? Are they able to process without all the facts? Are they able to, like, is that a thing? Yeah. So maybe that is why we need Grief 3.0. So that it's not something we as a team obviously talk about when we do, like when we did the other one and Maddie was able to join us.
Yes.
One thing I love about our team is that the way we show up is individual to each of our experiences. When we can and we have capacity, we'll tell you the absolute unfiltered truth. And I don't think there's been a topic that anybody's shied away from, sharing personal experience or whatever that looks like. And Sydney shared a couple of weeks ago that a friend of theirs commented listening to a team of neurodivergence talk about neurodivergence. So one was ENTS and one is ENT. And what did you had said, Sydney, they felt seen?
They felt seen. They felt he basically shared that felt seen in the experiences that we were sharing that he also experienced, and even just expanding his learning of himself and other neurodivergent folks.
That's one of the things I love. I started this podcast. I'm going to correct myself. I started across the desk in 2016 before I was aware of what my brain is. And I've done a few different themes isn't the right word, but I've done different podcasts. This has been my absolute favorite because
Woohoo.
honestly, you know me. Like,
I know you.
I'm a chatty gal. I just learn. And I love that I just love that that's what we're doing. And I love that even a tough topic like grief, we'll bring ourselves to the desk and we'll share what needs to be shared because we know it's making a difference. I wish I had known in my 20s why the grieving process was so hard, or what I perceive now as it was harder than.
Yeah.
I wish I had known that. I wish I had been kinder to myself about that. I wish I hadn't apologized for crying. I masked, I minimized. And maybe that's why I didn't with my mom,
Mm.
because masking and minimizing when my dad died and when my grandma died and when my grandpa died and all of that just made the grief process last so much longer than it needed to. So if you're in a situation where, like Paul had mentioned, you're grieving a job loss or, a relationship ending. I've had friendships end. I think we all have for a variety of reasons. Then please just know that what you're going through, it's your process. It's not weird or wrong or should be done any other way. It's how your brain needs to show up. Like Paul had said, if you find yourself needing to process verbally more than your friend's capacity, there's a wide variety of groups that you can connect to, and the benefit of that is that they are equipped. And it's not that they don't care, but it's also partly their job, and you want your friends to be there at the end of the process, the end of the acute part of the process. And Sydney, I loved what you said. Like, grief is a lifelong thing. And it doesn't mean that you sit in the horror show part of it for your whole life. But I don't think you ever fully put that down, especially when the loss is. I shouldn't say that. Do you think it depends on the loss, or just it depends on the. I don't think that's not the right thing.
That's not for us to decide. It's up to the person. I couldn't tell you and you couldn't tell me.
Valid. The only thing I'll end with is that be careful about carrying a suitcase of grief and using it as a reason not to live your life, not to pursue opportunities. Grief hurts. Don't get me wrong. It hurts. You got to keep going.
Keep putting that foot in front of the other. In front of the
Yep. We're starting to get into, what do they call it? We're starting to get into memes of some kind, but
the cliches.
yes, thank you. Good word. Drugs. Lots of drugs in my head right now. Yay! I mean, good drugs because I can function, but yeah, I think back 35 years ago when my dad died, and lying on the floor and just screaming and bawling and screaming some more. And I had a choice. I could still be on that ground.
Mm.
Being on the ground for a short period of time, totally okay. You need to lie on the ground, scream it out. Please lie on the ground, scream it out. But at some point, you got to get off the floor.
Yeah, at some point you got to get up.
Yeah. And it's not going to look the same. It's not going to feel the same. But we also don't want you looking at your life 30 years later and you're still on the floor.
Mhm.
Okay. On that happy note, we started out talking about a whole bunch of fun stuff and we pressed record and then the fun stuff went away and now it is what it is. Wherever you're listening or watching, if you have comments, if you have things to share, if you have topics you'd like us to talk about, trust me, nothing's off the table. Please leave it in there. If you're on YouTube, hello, watch it, leave comments there. Where are we? We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon, we're everywhere. We're like a pirate plague. In a good way.
Maddie would say something witty there. I can't think of anything.
I can't either. We'll have to ask them and then add it in somewhere.
I just like I literally like insert Maddie pun or thing here because
You're totally right.
Maddie quip.
Maddie quip. So we'll try and insert a Maddie quip. They'll get a laugh out of that. We'll try and insert a Maddie quip somewhere and see what we can do. Maybe I can ask them to watch this and then record. Okay. We'll do that. Okay, we got to go. This has been a long one. Thank you, folks. We really appreciate you hanging in. If you're having a bad day, it sucks. Tomorrow, get up off the floor. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, this is Elizabeth Blue from Spiro Canada, one of your pirates on the Riff Raff podcast team. My fellow pirates include Maddie Dever from Autistic Bridge, Sydney Elaine Butler from Accessible Creates, and Paul Coleman from Creation Designs, who is our very own Arctic LARPing Santa. Thank you for joining us on the Neurospicy Seas, and we wish fair winds to you all.